In this video, we're going to take a look at the relationship between technology and labor starting in about the late 1800s. Towards the end of the 1800s, Frederick Taylor developed what's called scientific management, also known as Taylorism. The idea behind scientific management is to use the scientific method to increase worker efficiency. The idea was to use standardization of movements or tasks to help workers achieve what could be done in the fastest way possible. It's the job of the managers to keep track of what workers are doing, to check in on their movements, to keep time schedules. Scientific management results in a rather firm division of labor, and fundamentally it makes work about generating profit for shareholders. It doesn't really take the worker themselves into account. Taylor had hoped that scientific management would improve conditions for the worker and for the owners of the factories. However, what we actually see is that scientific management led to de-skilling of a lot of workers' jobs. Ultimately, this led to alienation for workers, and fundamentally, standardization prevents workers from taking control of their own working conditions. I myself decided to make this video now rather than later because what I was working on wasn't going well, and I thought changing things up might make me personally more productive. That was a choice I got to make. So fundamentally, scientific management is incredibly dehumanizing to workers, and it doesn't ever allow you to have an off day, and really it punishes you for a good day because that becomes the expectation. Henry Ford took scientific management a step further. With Fordism, he created a moving assembly line in which he used technology to enhance worker efficiency and management. Obviously, this has all the same problems of Taylorism. Fundamentally, our approach to work has been centered around the need for increasing corporate profits. Obviously, the needs of the workers aren't really a factor in this equation. Ultimately, production meets the needs of the corporation, not the consumer. That has to be generated. If you're going to have mass production, you need mass consumption. Advertising is one of the critical ways we create user need. The Hawthorne experiments were some research studies that took place around 1920 to 1930 at the Western Electric Company's Hawthorne plant in Chicago. These studies were designed to show what actually improved worker productivity. What's interesting about these studies is that actually showed that the social aspects of work had a much greater impact on productivity than the physical environment. Workers produce more when they feel valued, and workers produce more when fairly compensated. Today, we talk more about networked organizations. Corporations initially had hierarchical structures and clear organizational charts, but over time, with the advent of the internet, we started to describe our corporations more as networked. Network corporations are generally paperless, for starters. There's a trend towards moving away having files and paper. My first job was filing, so that's a little bit different for all of us, and moving toward paperless work. We also have virtual teams. Virtual teams mean that you don't need to be in the same place or space as the people you're working with. They could really be anywhere in the world. I've worked on some projects with international organizations, and sometimes I had to be up very, very early or stay up very, very late to be on that Zoom call. And lastly, mobile reach. We can reach anywhere in the world with the device in our pocket. So that also allows us to have a lot of flexibility, mobility, and constant accessibility. So clearly, as I've alluded to, there are some problems with being in a networked organization as well. People sometimes report that being technologically tethered is very stressful, right? If you're always with your device, you're always potentially working. Our hyperconnectivity can make us feel like we always need to be productive and we always need to be checking in. Unfortunately, most of the work we take home really amounts to unpaid labor in what used to be our free time. So it's a real challenge to figure out how to find balance, especially balance with our devices, when they are actually designed to keep us there for as long as possible, since there's a profit motive involved to having us viewing. Just remember, when you're on social media, the product is that's actually being sold is you as an audience to advertisers. So your device is trying to keep you there as long as possible. I don't know about you guys, but when I'm actually forced to go and log in with Duo or use my device for work, sometimes I've actually put it away to try to allow myself to be more productive. Being forced to take it out can interrupt my productivity flow. Autonomous Marxism emerges in the 1960s. It's not just a theoretical perspective, but it's also part of a critical political movement. One of its key thinkers at the time is Lazzarato, who takes a view of what he calls immaterial labor in the post-industrial era. He points out that there's an increasing number of what he calls white-collar workers, people who are professionals, who operate the networks and flows, but don't really produce anything. Second, he observes that increasingly there are culture industries that shape tastes and create the need for the products being made by corporations. Basically, he's talking about marketing. Following these ideas, Bell expanded on the idea of a post-industrial society. Bell highlighted that services are replaced by manufacturing. Science-based industries come to dominate. An example would be how some majors on this campus are maybe valued more than others, when all of us work together to make things great around here. And third, we see a new social class emerge, a technocratic elite. Remember the concept of the prosumer that was discussed in one of my previous videos? It's the idea of merging of the producer and consumer that was originally developed by Alvin Toffler in the 1970s and 80s. In this view, consumers have an increasing impact on what products look like. Developing these ideas, producage is an idea that Axel Brunn came up with in 2008. It's a modification or a change to the concept of prosumption. In this view, we focus on high levels of interactivity between producers. Notice it's spelled with an S in this case, deliberately to highlight that it's a unique term. We take a look at things like information commons, places where we share, collaborate, negotiate, and develop. Wikipedia would be one key example. However, I want us to avoid idealizing these spaces. To some degree, it might be true that we're doing the labor out of love, but someone is profiting off the space. Brunn's developed 4 key principles of producage. First is the principle of open participation. The idea of open participation and communal evaluation centers on the idea that anyone in the community might contribute. Communities are considered highly inclusive and heterogeneous. Second is the idea that you should have fluid hierarchy and ad hoc meritocracy. This is the idea that the communities are based on your own input and expertise. Different people might be called on at different times when their expertise aligns with a project. It's not a top-down situation. Everybody has expertise that they can share on different subjects. Third, the artifacts are never finished. It's a continuing, ongoing process. You can always improve data and information. Everything is an ongoing work in progress. Finally, we have common property but individual rewards. Content is available to everybody who's involved. There's community-based copyright standards that have been created to guarantee, however, intellectual property rights. As an academic, I always like to have property rights protected. Increasingly, we function in what's called the sharing economy. The sharing economy is a form of platform economy that works entirely through digital platforms that manage and encompass all transactions. Airbnb, Uber, eBay, these are all examples. The problem of the sharing economy is that more and more people are working in what we call the gig economy. Over time, we've seen changes in the nature of work that make gig work more possible. ICTs make remote work possible in fields many people didn't usually work remotely in. My spouse is a radiologist who works 100% from home reading cases from hospitals all around the country. There's also flexibility to many types of work. We're able to do more in more different places using a wider range of tools with a wider range of people. I've worked on research projects with people in other countries. And finally, there's been an increase in casual project-based contracts and positions. That means that it's much more common for people to work in the gig economy rather than to have a long-term job with a pension. The gig economy has a number of inherent challenges. The first is there's nothing really to prevent outsourcing. Eventually, many jobs could be outsourced to places that have lower costs of living. There's also sometimes a deconstruction of work tasks, where tasks are broken into very small units and then given to lots of different people. There isn't really a sense of coherence around the product or the company. There's fundamentally a disruption to traditional industries and traditional jobs, and it takes a while to help the people who are in those industries find new types of work that match their skill level. And in many cases, they've made a financial investment that now isn't going to pay off. And finally, it really means that there's no true employee-worker relationship. While in some cases those relationships could be problematic, it also means that there isn't a lot of mentorship. One positive thing that shows up with the gig economy is the increase in what we call makerspaces. We have a really neat one here on our own campus. Makerspaces are basically the DIY subculture, where more of us enjoy doing things ourselves. One nice side effect is that 3D printing actually reduces technological waste, and that's one of the things that the makerspaces usually rely on. Increasingly, we also have a growth of crowdfunding, that if you have a great idea, you might crowdfund it to get it going. The problem is, crafting, makerspaces, it also becomes a marketing gimmick, a way to sell us our hobbies. Thanks for watching, and if you're on campus, why don't you check out our makerspace? It's pretty neat.